Shalom, friends. Welcome to this shiur in Talmud. We're studying Masechet Berachot, tractate Blessings. We're learning from the Koren Talmud Bavli, as you see in front of you, a very beautiful edition. We have the original text, also the translation with notes, and various other additional points, halachot, biographies, notes, illustrations, photographs. It makes the experience come alive, and please feel free to follow along in the different parts, and if there is something I might have mistranslated, please just check it out and see exactly what's happening during the shiur. Please follow along. I'm Eliyahu Shir from Chesed Ve'emet, my site www.lovingkindness.co, and we're currently at the end of Daf Yud Zayin Amud base, that's page 17, and we're at the end of the first side of 17. We're speaking about some wonderful blessings that the rabbis and sayings that the rabbis have been teaching us, some very beautiful words of blessings, sayings, famous sayings in the mouths of the sages. And we learned last week about a story when the students of one of the rabbis would leave. They would bless him with some very beautiful things. And we come now to the next part of the story. Ki havu mi patrei Rabbanan mi bei Rav Chisda, v'omri la mi bei Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani. When the sages left from the house of Rav Chisda, and some say it was the house of Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Nachmani, amru le hachi, they would say to him the following: Alufeinu mesubalim, and they would then recite the entire verse, which says, our leaders are laden, there is no breach and no going forth and no outcry in our open places. Let's just read that again. Our leaders, alufeinu mesubalin, which literally means they are overburdened. What does this mean exactly? Alufeinu mesubalim. What does this mean that our leaders are overburdened, or as they translate here, are laden? Rav u'Shmuel. There are two different opinions, the opinion of Rav and the opinion of Shmuel. V'omri la Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Elazar. Some say that this was taught, in other words, by Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. Chad Omar, one of them says the following: Alufeinu b'Torah, our leaders in the Torah, u'mesubalim b'mitzvot, and they are overburdened in mitzvahs. They are laden with mitzvahs. That is what the verse is coming to teach. V'chad Amar, and one of them says, Alufeinu b'Torah, our leaders in Torah, or mitzvahs, and also in mitzvahs, they lead us in both directions, u'mesubalim b'yisurim, and they are overburdened in afflictions. That is what this verse comes to teach us. This is the insight that the Gemara is giving us. The Gemara continues now onto Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Ein Peretz. What does it mean that there is no breach? We go back to this verse over here. Our leaders are laden. There is no breach and no going forth and no outcry in our open places. The Gemara is discussing all the parts of this verse. What does it mean that there is no breach? Ein Peretz. Shelo tehei siyatenu kesiyato shel David. That may it not be, in other words, may it be that our faction, those who are part of our team, should not be like the faction or the team of David, sheyatza mimenu Achitophel, that they came out from this whole story, the story of Achitophel. And as we know, Achitophel caused a breach in the kingdom of David. And so therefore we ask Hashem, this is what the verse is saying, let us not be associated with people like, to being stuck in a situation like David was, with people like Achitophel. V'ein yotzeit, what does it mean? And there's no going out. That may it be that our faction, our team, the people that we work with, should not be like the team, the people, the faction of Shaul, of King Saul. Sheyatza mimenu doeg ha'adumi, that there came out from him doeg, the Edomite, and he set forth on an evil path. And again, the verse is telling us, teaching us that we don't want to be in a situation to find ourselves amongst these type of people. V'ein tzavacha, and that there be no outcry. that there should not be within our faction, within our team, the people that we connect with, like the faction, like within the team of Elisha, the prophet Elisha, that there came out from this whole story a man by the name of Gehazi, who we know was a problematic person in the story of Elisha. He was the Gabbai of Elisha, and he was up to no good. And so in each one of these cases, the Gemara is pointing out, we really are saying in this verse, please Hashem save us ultimately from being part of a team of people, that there would be coming out of this team such negative people, bad people, evil people. What does it mean? In our streets, what does this mean exactly in our open places? Ben or Talmud, that there shouldn't be amongst us a son or a student, that he burns his food amongst his cooked dish, he burns amongst the public, like Yeshu the Nazarene, as it brought down over here, as you see what's written. Now, we're going to discuss this in just a minute. Keep in mind that these words that we're reading over here were introduced in the Steinsaltz edition as the additional part from the censored parts of the Talmud. In days gone by, there was a full Talmud with various sections in it, and unfortunately, throughout the ages, certain parts of the Talmud were taken out because apparently they referred to this man, and therefore these non-Jews had censored the Talmud and were not willing to allow that these parts of the Talmud be included within our text, as we see over here. It sounds like something very negative. We're going to see in a moment that apparently these sections that dealt with Yeshu HaNotzri are not dealing with the person that we think it is dealing with. We're going to see that in a note in a moment. We'll learn more about it. Although some people say it was, the majority of opinions indicate that this was not the person who founded the Christian religion. This is not who we're speaking about. Nevertheless, the Steinsaltz edition, the Koren Talmud Bavli, does include those censored parts for us to see what was written over there. So I'm just making it clear where we're coming from. Please do not run away yet. We have a note to read, and it needs to clarify exactly what we're talking about. But in the edition over here of the censored edition, which we're now seeing, the Talmud is bringing in, may it not be a part that we are set with a situation that we have a son or a Talmud who overcooks his food in public, referring to this particular man. We'll see in a minute who that is. Shimu Elai Abirelev. Now, we read over here, I'm just reading the English here, having cited a dispute with regard to the interpretation of a verse, where we are uncertain whether the dispute is between Rav and Shmuel or Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. The Gemara cites another verse with regard to which there is a similar dispute. Okay, we're going to see this in a minute. Let's read the notes while we're here. First point, there is no breach, ein peretz. The Aruch explains that Doeg played a role in the destruction of the priestly city of Nov, and Achitophel gave advice to Absalom that was damaging to King David, and so that is why the verse is coming to indicate that we pray to God. That's what the verse is saying, that we shouldn't have within our faction, we shouldn't meet up with people who are going to pull us off the path and be a bad influence and cause havoc in our lives. Now here we see the story as is well known in the case of Yeshu HaNotzri. What does this mean exactly? In standard versions of the Talmud, this story appears without the name, which was removed from censors due to sensitivity to the Christian society in which they lived. Another example appears in Tractate Soita. You can check it out there as well, for those of you who are interested, in 47a, where Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia is depicted as one who pushed aside Yeshu with both hands. The Gemara relates that Yehoshua ben Parachia was returning to Jerusalem following his flight to Alexandria in Egypt, together with his student Yeshu the Nazarene. When they stopped at an inn and were treated well, Yehoshua ben Parachia mentioned to Yeshu that the service was good. Yeshu responded that the innkeeper was unattractive. This response led Yehoshua ben Parachia, in other words his teacher, to ostracize Yeshu. Yeshua ben Prakia was unable to bring himself to revoke the ostracism until it was too late, and Yeshu turned away from traditional Judaism. That is the traditional story that we have about this particular person. It should be noted, however, that the story of Yeshua ben Prakia, who was driven from Jerusalem by the Hasmonean king Alexander Yanai, could not have taken place any later than 76 BCE. And we know, of course, Yeshu the Nazarene only lived, of course, much later. Consequently, the reference to Yeshu the Nazarene cannot be connected with the individual surrounding whom the Christian faith was established. Many commentators suggest that all Talmudic references to Yeshu refer to another person who had this exact same name. His name was Yeshu, Yeshu HaNotzri. Or perhaps there was more than one person with that name who lived during the time of the Mishnah. And so therefore, he brings it in here. He's not coming here to antagonize anybody or to say anything negative. This was the traditional version that the Talmud brought in, and it does include the story. But apparently, even though this name of Yeshu is mentioned, which is quite fascinating, it doesn't seem to be indicating that this was in fact the person responsible for starting the Christian religion. Now, the Gemara continues, Shemu elai abirei lev arechokim mitzdaka. Listen to me, those who are strong of heart, who are far from righteousness or charity, whichever way we're going to translate this. Rav or Shmuel, again, we have another argument between Rav and Shmuel. V'amri la Rabbi Yochanan v'Rabbi Elazar. And some say it was Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar who said the following about this verse. Chad Amar, one said, Kol ha'olam kulo nizaynim b'tzedakah. Everybody in the world is sustained through charity. And they are sustained through force, which means to say that it's their own force that is causing the blessing to come, instead of the fact that they receive their sustenance from the charity of God. And one says, all of the world are nourished through their merit, meaning the merit of these tzaddikim. That is how they get their merit. V'heim, that's how they get their sustenance. And these people that we're speaking about here, even from their own merit, they are not nourished. Rav Yehuda Omar Rav, as the teaching goes about Rav Yehuda said, that Rav said, to Omar Rav Yehuda, Omar Rav said, Rav Yehuda, he said that Rav said, B'chol yom vayom, every single day, Baskol yotzeit mehar chorev omeret. There is a voice that goes out from Mount Chorev. This is the mount that we know about where the Torah was given. It's also called Mount Chorev. It's also known as Har Sinai. And this voice says the following. Now, those of us who can't hear it, well, unfortunately, we can't hear it. That does not discount the fact, that does not take away from the fact that, in fact, this voice does go out. And on a subconscious level, we are hearing these type of things as well around us, even though it may be that we don't hear it fully as a proper sound. There are certain things that take place in our lives that somehow there are certain feelings that we get. Sometimes this is from these sounds that come about that are beyond or above the level of hearing that we can hear, and yet our souls are hearing it. This is what it says over here, that the voice goes out from Har Chorev and says the following: Kol ha'olam kulo nizaynim bishvil chanina b'ni. The entire world are all sustained on account of chanina masan, v'chanina b'ni. But chanina masan, da'ilo b'kav charuvin me'erev Shabbos le'erev Shabbos. It is sufficient for him to survive on a kav, that means a certain measurement of carobs from Erev Shabbos to Erev Shabbos. As is known, the story, Chanina, he would survive just eating a kav of carobs from 1 week to the next, whereas according to the Torah, according to what this teaching is saying to us, the entire world was nourished from the merit of his effort in serving Hashem, because he was a great man. And it's coming to teach us that even though the entire world was sustained through all of this, he himself went through a lot of suffering. Let's just take a look at this note here: stubborn-hearted. The commentaries who understand the verse stubborn-hearted, who are far from charity, as praise of the righteous rely on the subsequent verse, which promises rewards, which are certainly intended for the righteous. Upliga de Rav Yehuda. There's an argument, and this exegesis disagrees with Rav Yehuda. The Amar Rav Yehuda said, Man abirei leiv, who are these people who are the strong of heart, or as is translated here, the stubborn-hearted? Gova'e tipsha'e. These are the fools of Gova'e. These are the fools. What does it mean? Omar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef said, Teda, you should know. Nobody ever converted from these people, and so therefore it shows some sort of a stubbornness. That within this whole district, there wasn't anybody who ever converted. They were so stubborn against looking at what the Torah held that nobody came close to Torah from these ranks over here. Omar Rav Ashi said, B'nei mei masa mechasya abirei leiv ninhu. He says that the people of the city of Mechasya, they are the strong of heart, meaning the stubborn-hearted. What does that mean? These people see the greatness of the Torah twice a year, and still they don't convert. And still there is nobody who converts from their ranks. They would hear that there was Torah that was being given at the color gatherings in Adar and Elul, when thousands of people congregate and study Torah, and yet we see in the whole city, nobody seemed to pay any attention to what was going on, and nobody ever converted. So this is an interesting story. Now we continue back, as is the way of the Gemara. We speak about all sorts of subjects. We started off about a Mishnah related to something to do with a Kriyat Shema, and the next thing we know, we're speaking about other verses which relate to people converting, and so on and so forth. Chasan, imrotzeli krot. Now we learned out in the Mishnah, if the Chatan wants to read the Kriyat Shema, we have two opinions over here, whether or not it's considered to be an act of arrogance, or whether it's considered something that he should do. A chatan, a groom, on the first night that he gets married, should he recite the Kriyat Shema, or should he not recite the Kriyat Shema? Because the idea is one is supposed to have kavanah when one recites the Kriyat Shema. But on the night of his wedding, when he feels a bit nervous about other things going on during the evening, it could well be that he will be distracted. And as a result of that, perhaps it is not better. It's not a good idea for him to recite the Kriyat Shema on the first night that he marries, because since he's preoccupied with other things, he will not have intention. Now the Gemara goes into a debate. Should he be saying the Kriyat Shema on that night that he marries, or should he not? L'meimra, is this to say that the Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel chayesh leyohara, perhaps Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is afraid that maybe we suspect that there is a little bit of arrogance going on here, because he's saying here, the Chatan who wishes to read, what is the din? So the idea is v'Rabbanan, but with regards to the Rabbi's opinion, lo chayshe leyohara. The Rabbis do not regard it as being arrogant. So as far as the Rabbis are concerned, he can certainly say the Kriyat Shema. As far as Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is concerned, he should not say the Kriyat Shema, because by reciting the Kriyat Shema, it shows a measure of arrogance. He should be involved in the act that he is involved in that evening, and therefore, if he takes it upon himself to recite the Kriyat Shema, it is as if he has a level of arrogance, like he's going to concentrate, but he's not really going to concentrate. Only those people that can concentrate should say the Kriyat Shema on that night. So perhaps, does this mean to say that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is saying that perhaps he's arrogant, that's why he shouldn't say it? And the rabbis are saying, no, we're not worried that he's being arrogant, not at all. Vaha ipcha, but it's the opposite. Sham inan lahu. We learned out exactly the opposite, the Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, Makom shenahagu la'asot melacha b'tisha b'av. There is a law in a place where they are accustomed to do work on Tisha B'av. Those who know the halacha over here, what is the din, what is the law with regards to working on this day of Tisha B'av? On Tisha B'av, the temple was destroyed, and therefore, should a person do work on this day, or should he stay indoors, or be in shul, or wherever else he should be? Is it permitted to work or not? Because working could be a sign that he's not really interested in the day of mourning. So he says, Makom shenahagu la'asot melacha b'Tisha B'av osin. In a place where it is the custom to do work on Tisha B'av, one should do work. Makom shenahagu shelo la'asot, in a place where they say the custom of the community is that one should not work on Tisha B'Av, ein osin, we do not do any work. V'kol makom, and or every single place, Talmidei Chachamim b'Tehillim, wherever the Talmidei Chachamim are, whether they're in community A or whether they're in community B, they should be batel. They should not involve themselves in any work. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, the same rabbi that we're speaking about in our story about the recitation of the Kriyat Shema, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Le'olam, always, Ya'aseh kol adam et atzmo k'talmid chacham. A person should always consider himself to be like a Talmid Chacham. Interesting. In this example over here, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel holds that a person should always make himself like a Talmid Chacham. Well, if he should make himself like a Talmid Chacham, then it is also correct to say that a person who is getting married on the first night of his wedding night, he should indeed say the Kriyat Shema because he's a Talmid Chacham and he should be able to concentrate. Yet in our Mishnah, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, no, it's considered arrogance. Kashya, the Rabbanan. We have a difficulty, a contradiction of one opinion of the rabbis on regards to one statement, and as they speak about in another statement, Kashya the Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, other Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. And there's a contradiction of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel in one teaching on another teaching of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Omar Rabbi Yochanan said, Muchelefet tashita. He says the whole thing of this attribution of opinions should be reversed. Rav Sheisha bereid Rav Idi Omar. Rav Sheisha, the son of Rav Idi, said, Le'olam, always, should be the following, Lo tachalif. Don't change it around. I'll tell you why. There was no contradiction. The Rabbanan lo kasha. There was no contradiction of the one rabbi's opinion to the other rabbi's opinion. When the rabbi spoke about the Tisha B'Av issue and the rabbi spoke about Kriyat Shema on the first night of marriage, there's no kasha. We're not holding one issue in the one case and one issue in the other case. There's no difficulty. Kriyat Shema, here is the whole story. With regards to Kriyat Shema, where the rabbi said that he should say the Kriyat Shema, since everybody is reading the Kriyat Shema, the ihuna mikare, and he's also going to read it, lo mechezika yohara. You know what? It certainly won't look like arrogance because he is simply following everybody else. Hacha. But in our case, kevan dechule alma avdi melacha, since everybody else is doing melacha on Tisha B'Av, according to this opinion above, the ihulo ka'avid, and he is not doing any malacha because, so to speak, he's the Talmid Chacham who's not going to do any work. That would be like arrogance. The Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the Rabban Shimon Gamliel, lo kasha. Now, the two statements of Rabban Shimon Gamliel, there is also no difficulty in understanding it, because in the first case where Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is holding that he shouldn't say the Kriyat Shema, because it's like arrogance. And in the second case, he's holding you should become like a Talmid Chacham, which is not really arrogance, although that should be considered arrogance. That's not a contradiction when it came to Tisha B'Av. Why? Hasam, over there, B'kavana talia milta. This whole matter is dependent upon intention. In other words, you need to have intention when you say Kriyat Shema. The anan sahadei. And as far as we can see over here, it's clear to everybody, and we can all testify, it's clear to us all. The law matze lekavune daite. Everybody agrees that he would not be able to have intention, and so therefore he wouldn't have to say the Kriyat Shema. Aval hacha. But in our case, meaning to say in Tisha B'Av, haroe omer, the one who sees that this fellow is not working, Malakahu the ein law. They'll say there isn't any work for him. Check out, go and see how many people don't work in the marketplace, and therefore it is not considered to be an arrogant thing like he's considering himself to be a Talmid Chacham, because all that's happening is he's not working, very much like other people are also not working. Work on the 9th of Av. In a place where the custom is to perform labor on the 9th of Av, one may perform labor In a place where the custom is not to perform labor on the 9th of Av, one may not perform labor. And everywhere, Torah scholars are idle and do not perform labor. Anyone who seeks to emulate a Torah scholar in this regard is permitted to do so. The legal status of business dealings for profit is the same as that of labor, but business dealings should be curtailed from the start of the month of Av. In any case, even those accustomed to refrain from performing labor on the 9th of Av do so only until noon. If by refraining from work he will suffer an irretrievable loss, he is permitted to perform the labor in a manner similar to that of the intermediate days of a festival. One who performs labor on the 9th of Av, even after noon, in a place where it is customary not to do so, and even in a place where it is customary to perform labor, will see no blessing from the money he earns, brought down in the various main works of halacha, and so is the halacha. At this point in time, we have concluded Hadran Alach Hayakore. We have finished now. We will return to you, Hayakore, the second chapter of the tractate of Berachot. Let us read through together the summary, which is very clear to us. We may as well do it since it is here in front of us before carrying on. Most of the discussion in this chapter did not focus upon the ideal manner in which to recite Shema. Rather, it dealt with questions with regard to what extent can the recitation of Shema be altered or even abandoned when circumstances do not allow its standard recitation. Ideally, one should recite the entire Shema with all his heart. However, after the fact, if he only had the proper intention for the first verse alone and not for the rest of the Shema, he fulfilled his obligation. Those who have joined us for the previous shiurim will be reminded of these sections of the Gemara that we studied together. The relative significance of the various component sections of Shema is manifest in the determination of where one may interrupt his recitation due to honor that must be accorded or due to fear that one experiences to greet another person or to respond to his greeting. There is also room to distinguish between ab initio, that means from the beginning, and after the fact, with regard to the quality of the recitation. Ab initio, one must carefully pronounce each letter and avoid ambiguity or lack of clarity in reciting Shema. However, after the fact, even one who was not appropriately precise in reciting Shema fulfilled his obligation. Similarly, although one reciting Shema is required to recite it audibly, nevertheless, after the fact, one who did not recite it audibly fulfilled his obligation. The principle is that intent and understanding the meaning of the words are crucial. Consequently, one may recite Shema in any language that he understands. For that same reason, even after the fact, one who recites Shema out of order has not fulfilled his obligation, as that subverts the fundamental intent. Certain people, due to their unique situations, were permitted not to recite Shema, or at least to read it with less devotion, as we've just recently said. Included among those people are hired laborers who, in order to assist them in the performance of their tasks, were permitted to recite Shema at their work site, even though it is uncomfortable and their devotion is compromised. Beginning with the second section, they may even engage in their labor while reciting Shema. Work is not the only factor for which allowances are made in reciting Shema. Allowances are also made for one who is performing a mitzvah or even preoccupied about performance of a mitzvah. For that reason, a groom, as we learned, is exempt from the obligation to recite Shema on his wedding night. The sages reluctantly permitted a groom who insists upon it to recite Shema on his wedding night. Additional cases in which people are exempt from the obligation to recite Shema due to the performance of a mitzvah or preoccupation related to performance of a mitzvah will be discussed in the next chapter. Moving ahead now, we come to chapter 3 of our Gemara Berachot, Masechet Berachot. And the verse that is quoted here is, when you go forth in camp against your enemies, then you shall keep yourself from every evil thing. If there be among you any man that is not clean by reason of that which chance him by night, then shall he go abroad out of the camp. He shall not come within the camp. But it shall be when evening comes on, he shall bathe himself in the water, and when the sun is down, he may come within the camp. You shall have a place also without the camp, where you shall go forth abroad, and you shall have a paddle among thy weapons. And it shall be when you sit down abroad, you shall dig with it, and you shall turn back and cover that which comes from you. For the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and to give up your enemies before you. Therefore, your camp shall be holy, that he see no unseemly thing in you and turn away from you. We see this coming from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 23, verses 10 to 15. We're going to read through this introduction very quickly and move straight ahead into the Gemara. This chapter is, in a sense, a continuation of the previous chapter. The previous chapter also dealt with problems that arise as a result of circumstances that hinder the recitation of Shema. However, those hindrances were primarily generated by external factors that prevent one from reciting Shema properly. In this chapter, hindrances of a different sort will be discussed, i.e., cases where one is in a place or a situation where it is inappropriate to engage in sacred activities. One problem discussed in this chapter is how one should act as far as Shema and prayer are concerned in various conditions of mourning, both in terms of the mourner himself and in terms of those engaged in burial of the deceased. Another problem related to the mitzvahs of Shema and prayer is a byproduct of their very essence. When a person accepts the fundamental tenets of his faith and stands before his Creator, he should do so while clean and ritually pure, which is the introduction that we had to this chapter. However, there are circumstances which render a person ritually impure or constitute an unclean environment. Precise determinations are necessary to establish when those circumstances completely exempt one from the obligation to recite Shema and pray, and when the obligation is merely postponed. The verses in Deuteronomy, which warn a person to avoid ritual impurity and filth in an army camp, apply everywhere at all times. We're going to learn about problematic situations of praying when there is some sort of dirt in our presence and what we can do, what we can't do, what we should do, etc. A Jew is always obligated to acknowledge, for the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp, especially when engaged in sacred activities. In Halacha, this was consolidated into three categories: ritual impurity, unseemly matters, and filth. Ritual impurity is not in essence tied to a concrete flaw. Nevertheless, it is a spiritual flaw from which it is incumbent upon the person to purify himself before entering the camp. The third directive with regards to ritual impurity resulting from a seminal emission leads directly to the discussion of the ordinance instituted by Ezra. Those people who are familiar with this will know about the idea that when a man has a seminal emission, that in order to purify himself ritually, he will go to a mikvah, a natural body of water consisting of a certain amount of water inside it, and he immerses himself completely naked without any intervening substances. Now, this ordinance established that one who is ritually impure due to a seminal emission, including a husband who engaged in conjugal relations with his wife, is forbidden to recite Shema, pray, or study Torah until he immerses himself and becomes ritually pure. Even though it never gained widespread acceptance, in many senses, several appropriate modes of conduct with regard to caution and ritual purity while studying Torah and praying were established by virtue of that ordinance. The concept of unseemly matters also has far-reaching applications. It includes any exposed limb in the human body that is usually covered. On the one hand, this was instituted to prevent arousing sexual desire while engaged in sacred activity. However, there is another aspect. As it says in the Torah, all nakedness involves contempt for God, and consequently covering that nakedness is an acknowledgement of the sanctity of the matters in which one is involved. What is true with regard to spiritual flaws also applies to actual filth. The Torah commandment to be vigilant about cleanliness within the camp was formulated as a general directive to avoid every evil thing. That includes avoiding all sights or smells that provoke disgust or unpleasantness, which should be avoided at all times, especially when reciting Shema and praying. Defining and illuminating these elements and determining their precise parameters are the primary focus of this chapter. It's a very exciting chapter. Please don't run away. There is so much to learn in this chapter, some fascinating pieces of Agadah, which really keep us glued to the text. So don't be feel that you've lost out on anything from listening to all of these introductions. The Gemara is about to get highly exciting, so please stay tuned. The Mishnah begins, Perek Gimel. Here we are on chapter 3, moving ahead steadily. Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, page 17, side B. We continue. Masnisin. This is the Mishnah. The story goes as follows. A person whose dead lies before him, somebody died. Patur mikriyat Shema. He is exempt from reciting the Kriyat Shema. The scenario, a relative died. A person is forbidden to recite the Kriyat Shema. Uminat tefillah, he may not daven the Shemona Esrei. Uminat tefillin, he may not wear tefillin. Umikol mitzvahs ha'amuras b'Torah, and such an individual is exempt from all the commandments that are spoken about in the Torah. Because the person died, he is exempt from all mitzvot. Nosei hamita, those who are carrying the coffin, those who are carrying the mita, the bed, literally. V'kilufeihin, and those who are going to exchange with them. V'chilufei chilufeihim, and those who exchange with those who exchanged. Es shelifnei hamita, those who are in front of the mitah, the coffin, the bier. Ve'es shela'achar hamita, and those that are behind the mitah, the bier, the coffin. Et shelifnei hamita, those who are in front, right in the front, standing there by the bier. Tzorech bahem, and they are needed. Paturin, they are exempt. They cannot say the Kriyat Shema. They are busy. Ve'et shela'achar hamita tzorech bahem, and those that are behind, so they are not needed because they're behind. They're not yet needed. Chayavim, they are obligated. Ve'elu, and these and those. Paturin min atfila. Everybody is exempt from reciting Shemona Esrei. The Mishnah continues. Kavru et hamet v'chazru. They buried the dead person, and now they returned back to their stations. Im yacholim lehatchil v'ligmor ad shelo yagiu l'shura. If they'll be able to begin and to complete their davening, the Shema, to the degree that they'll still be able to make it before they get back into where they have to be, in the row where they happen to be, yatchilu, they should begin. V'im lav, if they don't have enough time, lo yatchilu, then they should not begin the Shema. Ha'omdim bashura, now those standing in the row itself. Ha'pnimiyim, those who are in the inside, interior row. Paturim, they're exempt. V'achitzonim, those who are on the outside. Chayavim, they're obligated. Take a look here again. So those who are in the interior directly before whom the mourners will pass and who will console them, they're exempt from reciting Shema. And those who are on the exterior, who stand there only to show their respects, they're obligated to recite the Shema. The Mishnah continues. Fascinating halacha. Nashim, v'avadim, uketanim, peturim mikriyat Shema or minat tefillin, women, servants, and slaves. When we speak about the concept of the biblical slave, we need to discuss in a lot more detail who exactly is the biblical slave. This is not what we're talking about, that the Jewish people would have slaves and they had whips and they used to whip them and all these different things. And that's not what we're speaking about. We need to discuss more about the details, exactly who was the slave in the Jewish world at this point in time. So women and slaves, servants, uketanim, and young children, which means minors under the age of 13 or 12 for boys and girls. Paturim mikriyat Shema. They're exempt from Kriyat Shema. Uminat tefillin. And they're also exempt from tefillin. In other words, the young boys who are under the age of 13. Obviously, the girls are paturim from tefillin because this is not a mitzvah for the girls. V'chayavim b'tefillah, but everybody is obligated in prayer, over mezuzah, and in putting a mezuzah on their doors, or b'birkat hamazon, and in benching after eating. So everybody is obligated in these things. If a Jewish girl, a Jewish woman, moves into an apartment of her own and there's nobody else staying with her, she may and must purchase a kosher mezuzah, and she must place the kosher mezuzot, on all the doors of her home, of course, with the exception of the bathroom and various other rooms which are dirty and do not require a mezuzah. So we see over here that all of these people that we spoke about would be obligated, as we say. An additional point here, that the women and the slaves and the minors are exempt from Kriyat Shema, from tefillin, but they are obligated in davening. They're exempt from Kriyat Shema, but they're obligated in davening. They're obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah, and they're obligated in benching. Let us take a look at the notes. One whose deceased relative is laid out unburied before him is exempt from the recitation of Shema. In the Jerusalem Talmud, the verse that you may remember the day when you came forth out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life was cited in support of this halakha. Remember the Exodus on days that you are involved with the living and not on days when you're involved with the dead. And therefore these people are exempt because somebody died, and as a result, until this person is buried, they are completely exempt from all of these mitzvot. Both these and those are exempt from reciting the Amidah prayer. Although the bier no longer requires their services, nevertheless, they are exempt from the obligation to pray because they're engaged in performance of a mitzvah. And the principle is one who is engaged in a mitzvah is exempt from a mitzvah, says the Magen Abraham. The halacha, one whose deceased relative is laid out unburied before him, is exempt from the recitation of Shema. A mourner is exempt from reciting Shema and prayer and performing all other positive mitzvot until the deceased he is mourning is buried. There's a big halacha, many people are unaware of it. We're reading it together. Pay attention. If you're uncertain what to do in these circumstances, ask your local Orthodox rabbi, a person who is qualified to rule in halachic matters, and he will explain to you exactly what the various laws are with regards to death and mourning, etc. Who are the nosei hamita, those who carry the bier, the pallbearers? The pallbearers and their replacements, all of whom are needed to carry the bier, are exempt from reciting Shema and performing other positive mitzvahs. If the replacements are not needed to carry the bier, they are obligated. However, all of the pallbearers are exempt from prayer. The Gemara begins. Mutal lefanav. In. V'she'eino mutal lefanav. Lo. If the dead person is in front of one, yes, it is true. All of these things pertain. In other words, he's exempt. But if it is that the dead person is not around, she'eino mutal alav, is not in front of him, lo, then he is not exempt from these mitzvot. That is a statement of the Gemara. That's a teaching. Uriminhi, the Gemara raises a contradiction from another Braita. What does it say? It says, Mi shemeiso mutal lefanav. Here is the law. A person who's dead lies in front of him. Ochel bebayis acher. He may eat in another house. Perhaps another room. If we're not speaking about houses, at least a separate room. Which means to say he goes to another room and he eats. If he has no other home, he has no other room, he can go off and he can eat in the house of his friend. The Gemara continues, if he doesn't have a room in his friend's house, you know what he can do? He can make a partition. And he can eat over there, separating him from the dead person. It is not honorable. It is not respectful to eat in the presence of a dead person. Somebody dies, he's lying in the bed, he died in his bed, natural death, was sleeping, didn't wake up. And we wake up, we realize this person didn't wake up. If we are sitting in his presence, it is not correct to eat in his presence. You want to eat, you can eat outside. It is various things are disrespectful to the dead person. Let us not forget. We need to have great respect. The person's soul has left his body, and we need to show great respect for the person at this point in time. He is entering another world. We should not just get on with our activities as if life carries on for normal for us, because we need to respect the fact that he is currently on a new journey. And at this point in time, we need to do everything that we can to respect him and to bring him into the world that he has now entered in a respectful manner. So we can make a mechitza. We can make a partition that separates us from the dead person. Machazir panav, one second, if he doesn't have anything to make this mechitza, this separation, this partition, machazir panav ochel, he can even turn his face away and eat. At least don't face the dead person. He should not recline and eat. Don't take it easy, he says over here. Basar, do not eat meat. And don't drink wine. Don't make a blessing. And don't invite, meaning make an invitation, a zimun. Don't have three people eating bread together. And then they say, Rabbosai, Nevarech, masters, let us bench, gentlemen, let's bench, etc., etc. Says the halacha, one whose deceased relative is laid out before him eats in another room. One whose deceased relative has not yet been buried may not eat in the same house in which the body is located. In exigent circumstances, when there is no alternative, one may avert his face from the deceased and eat. On weekdays, he is exempt from reciting blessings and does not join others in a zimun. A person who's dead is before him and has not yet been buried, recites no blessings. He may not be included in zimun. These are very hard halachot for people who are used to rattling off brachot when they eat their food and so on and so forth. As we know, is the custom. People get carried away with their brachot and they even forget they're making a bracha. It just happens so naturally. Well, if a person dies and he has not yet been buried, so the person who is going to mourn for him may not recite blessings on the food that he is eating. We continue. Daf Yud Chet Chai, page 18, Amud Aleph. Ve'ein mevarachim alav, ve'ein mezamnim alav, and we do not bless for him, and we do not invite him for the blessing of the bread. Or patu mikriyat Shema, and this person is exempt from reciting the kriyat Shema. Uminat tefillah, and of course he's exempt from praying. Uminat tefillin, he may not put on tefillin, as we know is the halacha. Somebody who loses a relative, he must mourn for this relative. We know that he doesn't put tefillin on the first day of the mourning. Umikol mitzvahs ha'amuras b'Torah, and all the mitzvahs that are mentioned in the Torah, he's exempt from them. Meaning to say positive mitzvahs, of course, not negative mitzvahs. Now, of course, all negative mitzvahs, everybody's obligated in all the time. If it says you shall not do this or you shall not do that, it doesn't make a difference if somebody died. So you say, well, there goes all the mitzvahs. We mean all positive mitzvahs. He is not obligated in positive mitzvahs. In negative mitzvahs, of course, he is obligated in. Or b'Shabbos. What about Shabbos? What's the halacha? May save, he reclines. Of course, he can eat meat and he drinks wine, no problem. And he blesses and he invites people to the zimun when they eat, three people eating bread together. And people can bless for him also, and they can invite him to the zimun. And he's obligated in all the mitzvahs, which are in the Torah. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabban Shimon Gamliel says, since he's obligated in all these mitzvahs, he's obligated in all the mitzvahs. Everybody's listening to the statement, sounds quite peculiar. First of all, the rabbis told us he must do all the mitzvahs. And then Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel jumped on the bandwagon. He says, since he's obligated in all these mitzvahs, he's obligated in all the mitzvahs. Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan, he says, Ma beinahu. Well, what's the difference? What difference does it make? One opinion was given over here, they're obligated in all the mitzvahs. And then Rabban Gamliel, Shimon ben Gamliel stepped up and he says they're obligated in all the mitzvahs. Answer, Tashmish Amita, Ika beinahu. There is the mitzvah of having conjugal relations with one's wife. That is the difference, which means to say, as far as Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel was concerned, even though on Shabbos he engages in all mitzvahs, and since there is a mitzvah to be intimate with his wife on Shabbos, but nevertheless, he is exempt because it's in a private capacity, and so therefore he does not engage in this particular mitzvah. The first Tana holds that although there is no mourning on Shabbos, since refraining from addressing his wife's conjugal rights would not be a public display of mourning, conjugal relations are prohibited. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel holds that since there is no mourning on Shabbos, he must fulfill the mitzvah of addressing his wife's conjugal rights. So the first example, I think I said that incorrectly. The first example was that the first Tana was holding that he is exempt, and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel was saying he is still chayev, he is obligated in the mitzvah of being intimate with his wife. The Gemara continues. Kasane mihas. In any event, let's go back to what we were talking about. It was taught, nevertheless, however, patur mikriyat Shema, he's exempt from kriyat Shema, uminat tefillah, and from davening, uminat tefillin, and from putting on tefillin, and we call mitzvahs hamus b'Torah, and in all the mitzvahs that are spoken about in the Torah. Omar Rav Papa said, Targama amachazi panav v'ochel. He says that explain the idea that he turns his face and he eats with the deceased laid out before him. In other cases, when he is in a different room, he is obligated in all mitzvahs. Ravashi Omar, Vashi said, Kaivan shemutal alav lekovro, since it is that it is imposed upon him that he must bury this person, actually, it is as if the dead is spread out in front of him, which means to say that even if he wouldn't be in the same room, the fact that he has an obligation in any case to bury this person, it is as if the person is in front of him. How do we know that? Because the verse says, Vayakam Avraham me'al pnei meito, that Avraham got up from upon the face of his dead, referring to Sarah, his wife, who had died. And the truth of the matter is that she had not yet been buried. V'ne'emar, and it says over there, al panai, from upon my face, it says, Ve'ekparamesi milfanai, and let me bury my dead from in front of me. But of course, she wasn't directly in front of him, but it's still considered that way because she has to be buried. That is the mitzvah that Abraham had to attend to. All the while that it was imposed upon him to bury the dead person, it's as if the person was laid out in front of him, and all the halachot should apply. Meisor, the Gemara continues, if it is his dead person, meaning related to him, it's his relative, yes, that is true, even if the person isn't directly in front of him, since the person is in a state that the person now, the relative, has to take care of him and bury him, he is considered in this category. Aval mishamro lo, but a person who's just guarding him, no, he is not exempt. He still has to fulfill all the mitzvahs. But the Gemara continues with a problem. V'hatanya, but didn't we learn in a brisa? Wasn't it taught in a brisa? Hamishamer is hameis, somebody who's guarding a dead body, afal pisha eno meso, even though it is not his relative, in other words, patur mi kriyat shema, he is exempt from kriyat shema, which is not in accordance with this teaching over here. Umina tefillah, and from davening. Umina tefillin, from wearing tefillin. Umikol mitzvahs ha'amuros b'Torah, and all the mitzvahs that are spoken about in the Torah. Meshamro, if he is guarding him, af al pi she'eno meso, even though it is not his relative, he would still be in the situation. Meso, even if it was his relative, afal pi she'eno meshamro, even if he would not be guarding him. Let me just read that again in English. The Gemara responds that these two sources should not be understood as contradictory, but as complementary. In both cases, he is exempt. Where one watches over the deceased, but is not his deceased relative, as well as the case where it is his deceased, but he is not watching over the deceased. Meso or meshamro, in, if it is his relative, or if he happens to be guarding him, yes. But if it's just a person who happens to be walking through the cemetery, he doesn't have to worry about all these things. Says the Gemara, ask the question, V'hatanya, there wasn't it taught in another brayta, Lo yahalech adam bebeitz hakavarot utefillin berosho, the Sefer Torah bizru'o, the Korei. Wasn't it taught in another brayta that a person should not walk in a cemetery with tefillin on his head and a Sefer Torah in his arm and he's busy reading? Which means to say, everybody is exempt from fulfilling all of the mitzvahs, even when you walk in a cemetery. But according to this, somebody who walks in a cemetery is still obligated. So how come we say that he shouldn't do it? Ve'im osekain, and if he does so, over mishum loeg larash, he transgresses against a great rule of the Torah, which is brought down in this verse that says, loeg larash cheref osehu, a one who scoffs at the poor. It is as if he shames his maker. On a simple level, what this means is somebody who laughs at a poor person for his lot in life. He mocks him, he scoffs at him, he insults him, he jokes about him, he speaks badly about him because he's poor. Says Shlomo HaMelech, it is as if he shames his maker, the one who made this person, and actually who made him as well, both people. It's like he shames him. Because the person who finds himself in a situation of being poor, it is not because of his own doing, it is because that it is life circumstances. For some odd reason, God has put him into a position where he lacks income. Sometimes he works, doesn't get paid. Sometimes he works overtime, still doesn't get paid. Sometimes he works 3 jobs, doesn't get paid. Other times he works 3 jobs, he gets less than minimal salary. Next fellow comes on board, he goes and plays golf, he has a good time, he goes and talks to a few friends, he transacts a particular transaction, he becomes a multimillionaire. The concept of work and making income is not a fair concept. Many people work very, very hard their whole lives and they barely get through. Other people work less, but somehow they know how to work within the system. They make a lot more very quickly. What's going on? What's going on is God is blessing one through an easy way. He's helping the person along and giving him much blessing. And in the other example, God is holding back the blessing from the other person. And even when he works hard, he puts all his effort in, he works a full day just like everybody else. He helps many people, he's kind, he does the right thing, and still he's lacking. When one scoffs at the poor person, it is as if he shames his maker. It is as if he blasphemes his creator. He speaks badly about his creator. He's only talking badly about the creator. He's not talking bad about the poor fellow. He's talking badly about the creator. Loeg larash, the one who is scoffing at the poor. But in our example, who is the poor person? The poor person is the one who has died. Because if he died, he is poor in that he can no longer fulfill mitzvot. And therefore, if I walk in a cemetery with my tefillin on my head and on my arm, I am laughing and insulting the poor person who is no longer able to fulfill the mitzvahs. Look at me, I say to the poor person, meaning the dead person, I am fulfilling mitzvot, and you cannot because you are dead. And I can continue to increase in my mitzvah observance. I can go from level to level. I can study Torah. Look at all these things I can do. And you can't do any of them. Here I am studying Torah in the cemetery. Here I am wearing tefillin. Here I am walking through the cemetery with the Sefer Torah and showing the dead people how I'm connecting with God in this world, rising from level to level. This is called a person who is loeg larash. He insults the poor. And ultimately, all that he does really is he shames his creator. He blasphemes his creator. He speaks badly about his creator. What type of a person behaves in that way? This person is dead. He cannot fulfill mitzvahs. And one walks into the cemetery with his tefillin on, disgracing the dead, disgracing God himself. One may not do this. It is forbidden. The Gemara tells us right here in this particular section, says to us from a quote in the pasuk over here in Mishlei, one should not behave in this way. This is very difficult to understand because we've been saying that people who are not involved directly with the dead person, they are still obligated in mitzvahs. So then we brought in this teaching that says, but hold on a second. If that's the case, we learned in another braita that the truth is that if one walks in the cemetery and he observes mitzvahs, that's also a problem. What's going on? Hassam over there, toch arba amot, hud asur. We're actually speaking about an instance of within 4 amot, it is forbidden, which means if we are in the presence of a dead person, meaning the cemetery we're talking about, and within 4 amos, within 6 to 8 feet, within, let's say, 2 meters, we should not engage by wearing out tefillin. We should not engage by wearing out tzitzit, hanging out. We should not engage in the study of Torah. These are all problematic. Within 4 cubits of this dead person, of the cemetery, one may not do it. Chutz le'arba amos, chayev. If one is outside of the 4 amos, one is obligated. So the person who is not directly involved in the scenario of the mourning for this dead person, of course, 4 amos outside of the cemetery is certainly obligated. But 4 amos inside the cemetery, when he is close to the grave, he must be very careful. Even if it's only 1 grave and there's 1 dead person there, one should be very careful in his presence. To Omar, the Mar said, Meis to face arba amos lekriyat Shema. The master said that the dead person occupies 4 cubits, which means 6 to 8 feet, approximately 2 meters, for the idea of Kriyat Shema, for reciting Kriyat Shema. Haka, over here, chutz le'arba amos, when he is outside of this distance of 4 amos, nami patur, he is also exempt. Let's take a look at these notes here a moment. One who watches over the deceased, Hameshameret Hamet, one who is watching over the deceased, even if he is not a relative, is exempt from reciting it and exempt from all mitzvahs in the Torah. However, if there were two people watching over the deceased in shifts, while one watches, the other recites Shema, and vice versa, which is the correct thing to do. Everybody knows there's a big mitzvah of being a shomer. If we find that there is somebody who died, one must be with the body at all times until the burial. We should not leave the body by itself just lying around. And therefore we have the custom to be a shomer, to be a god. Once one is a god, one is prevented from fulfilling all of these mitzvot of the Torah. Well, what's the only way out? The only way out then is that we have shifts. One person is watching the dead body, while the other person is reciting the Shema and he's davening, etc. And then they switch over, and the other person attends to the mitzvahs, and the other person continues guarding the body. Reciting Tehillim, that's a different issue altogether. Prayers and words of that type of nature are permitted, but one should not involve oneself in the study of Torah, etc., in the presence of this dead person. One may not walk in the cemetery with phylacteries on his head. It is prohibited to enter cemetery or to come within 4 cubits of the deceased with exposed phylacteries, the tefillin. But if they are covered, it is permissible, brought down in the various halakhic sources. One may not walk in a cemetery with a Torah scroll in his arm and read from it. It is prohibited to enter a cemetery with a Torah scroll, or to read the Torah in a cemetery, or to read it within 4 cubits of the deceased. So is the halakha. Prayer before the deceased. It is prohibited to recite Shema in a cemetery or within 4 cubits of the deceased. The same is true with regard to reciting all other sacred matters brought down by the Mishnah Brura. One who recited Shema in the presence of the deceased is penalized by the sages, and they decreed that he did not fulfill his obligation. The Ravad ruled that he fulfilled his obligation. Since the Rambam ruled that he must repeat Shema, the ruling is that he repeats Shema, but he does not repeat its blessings, brought down in the Berachot. Let us just finish this one paragraph very quickly, because it's the end of this page. Gufa. We go back to the original text. Hameshamer is hames, somebody who's guarding the dead person. Aval pishe eino meiso, even though it's not his relative, not his dead person. Patur mi kriyat Shema, he's exempt from kriyat Shema. Umina tefillah, and from davening. Umina tefillin, and from wearing tefillin. Umikol mitzvahs amrus b'Torah, and all the mitzvahs that are spoken about in the Torah. Hayu shnayim, if there were 2, as we just learned in the halakha, zeh meshamer v'zeh koreh. This one guards, this one reads. V'zeh meshamer v'zeh koreh. And this one then guards, and this one reads. Ben Azai Omer, Ben Azai says, Hayu ba'im b'sfina. If they were traveling in a ship, what should they do? Manicho b'zavit zo, or mitpalelin. They can leave the dead person in the corner and they can daven. Shneihem b'zavit acheret. Both of them together in another corner. The Gemara asks, my beinahu, what is the difference between these 2 opinions? One said he should guard while the other davens, and then the other one, he guards and the other one davens. Ben Azai says, if you're in a ship, so then you can go ahead and daven with leaving the coffin wherever it happens to be, and you go off to another corner. Omar Ravina said, here's the difference. We worry about mice even inside the boat. What does that mean? One holds with regards to the boat. Mar Savar, one says, Chashinan. We worry that there could be the mice. And therefore, this halakha would apply of guarding and the other one praying. And then the other one guards and the other prays. Umar Savar, and one holds, Lo Chashinan, we are not worried that there would be any mice, and therefore they may in fact both go and pray. I'm not quite sure at this point in time who is taking care of the body, but according to this last teaching here, they can both go off and daven on the other corner of the boat. Next week we continue the next section in the Gemara. We finished off a section over here. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope that you've enjoyed this shiur, learned something from the shiur, even if it's 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, whatever it is. If you have enjoyed the shiur, please do like my shiur by giving me the thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it. It makes a difference to me. It helps my channel. Please feel free to share the shiur with your friends and family. It also helps me as I'm trying to promote my channel, and you can make the difference by sharing this with others. I'm Eliyahu Shir from Chesed Ve'emet. My site is www.lovingkindness.co, and you can feel free to be in touch with me about any area of Torah that you'd like to discuss, life, growth, or feel free to book a time to learn. Together we can learn a shiur in something. I also teach sofrut, so I can teach you how to write a mezuzah one day, and I also teach chatanim, grooms, so that they're prepared for marriage and know all the halachot that are involved and prepare for this big journey upon their lives, which should take them across to the rest of their lives together as a happy couple. Don't forget, my wife is involved in teaching the kalot. So for the men, please come through to me and I'll be delighted to teach you. And for the ladies, please, you can be in touch with me as well, and I'll put you on to my wife and you can be in touch with her. Thanks very much for joining me. I look forward to another shiur in the near future, and I wish you everything of the best. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.